This is Corey Willis with PPEI, and you're listening to the Diesel Podcast.
I'm Adam Blattenberg from Diesel World.
This is Dan, owner of Dan's Diesel Performance.
I'm Braden Fleece, and you're listening to the Diesel Podcast.
What is going on, Diesel Nation? We're excited to have you guys with us today on the Diesel Podcast. Today's episode is going to be all about 6.7 liter Powerstrokes. We have Cass from Choate Engineering on. We wanted to ask him, what are some failures that he's seeing, even on bone stock trucks? We've seen a lot of Facebook posts and Instagram comments and a lot of things from guys with not that many miles on their truck where they've had a catastrophic engine failure. And he sees hundreds or thousands of engine cores per year. And so he's going to come on and he's going to tell us what common failure he sees, why he thinks it's happening, and things that you can do if you own one of these trucks to potentially avoid it. Now, if you've already had the catastrophic engine failure, there are some fixes and some upgrades that Choate Engineering does when they rebuild the engine that can make sure that it doesn't happen again. So we're going to go through that and also ask him about the 2020 Powerstroke and the really interesting piston and rod design that they have coming in OEM engine that is going to allow it to trickle down to 11 to 19 trucks in the aftermarket. So it's going to be a fun episode. Before we get to it, though, we wanted to let you guys know we've just started a second podcast. It's called the Power Driven Podcast. And what we're going to be talking about is not so much the specifics of diesels or even motorsports in general, but the stories behind the people. So we've had Ryan Milliken on the Diesel Podcast a handful of times, and he's well known. You guys know who he is, his race vehicles, things he's done in diesel motorsports and for the community. But he has an amazing story outside of that. And we wanted to be able to sit down with him and ask him where his competitive nature came from. What were some obstacles that he was confronted with before getting into diesel, and how that shaped him as a business owner and a leader in his industry. And we're going to be releasing episodes each week. Some of them are going to be from guests that you're familiar with. Some you're not. They might not even be related to motorsports. But we wanted to talk about the power that drives people, whether that's being competitive, whether that's a vision, whether that's a dream, whether it pertains to business or personal triumph. We want to tell those stories. So we encourage you guys to follow the Power Driven Podcast on Instagram, on YouTube, any of the podcast apps that you listen to the Diesel Podcast is where you're going to find it. So make sure you go check out the episode that we just did with Ryan Milliken, and each week we're going to be releasing a new one. All right, guys, let's get to the podcast with Cass and talking about 6.7 liter Powerstroke engine failures. Cass, welcome back to the Diesel Podcast. I'm excited to chat with you today. And last time we talked about 6.4 Powerstroke engines, and today we're going to talk about 6.7 Powerstrokes, and it's a hot topic. There's a lot of truck owners out there, and a lot of them that are, coming off that factory warranty, and either people are looking to do things with them or they just need engine help, quite frankly. And that's what we're going to jump into today.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here, and always enjoy talking about what we love doing every day.
Yeah, the 6.7 Powerstroke, it's really interesting because I haven't owned one or driven one. I have some friends that have them and, talking about them on the podcast and stuff, but they seem like they addressed a lot of issues that the 6.0 and the 6.4 had. And it seems like a more reliable or robust platform, but you guys are seeing core engines. You guys are having customers call you all the time. What are some general either complaints or failures or things that you guys are seeing with, like the 11 to 14s, the 15 to current, and some upgrades and things that you guys are working on to help make them even stronger?
The 6.7 is an interesting engine. The reason why I think it's such an interesting engine is because Ford is just bound and determined, because of the amount of money that they've spent on this platform. It's stayed around now longer than just about, say, if you think about the 7.3, it was not the IDI, but the direct injection from 94.5 to 03, and you figure in how long that was around, about 8.5 years. Then you take and you figure in already now the 6.7's been from 2011 to the 2020. It's been around longer than the 7.3, which is kind of hard to fathom. I don't know, for me anyways. In my mind, it just seems like the 7.3 legacy and era just lasted for forever. But thinking about the 6.7, it's been around longer than the at least, like I say, the direct injection version of it has been around longer. The 6.7 has gone through a tremendous amount of changes. There's been a lot of things like there is in any type of manufactured product. You start out and you start seeing maybe they could do this better, they could do this different, or they could save costs here or do something like that. So because of that, it presents different challenges and different problems, and that's something that each year that we see is a little bit different on the 6.7. The 6.0, the 6.4s, they had very little long block differences. There's not hardly actually nothing to speak of. But the 6.7, we've seen changes in anything from the connecting rods that they're using, which they had 3 different changes there, to the blocks that they're using currently. Now the block's based off the same design, but it is slightly different. Some things that you'll find out between the blocks that you're buying now, and this is something what we've learned years of late, is Ford apparently they're basically out of the stock of inventory that they had that was 11 to 19 based, and now what they're using is a redesigned block that will be a direct fit for the 2020s because they changed the oil pump to be a variable speed, variable displacement pump, and so that they basically adapted that for every engine you buy now has the bolt, the threads for that pump. So not only that, the bolt holes on the engine mounts are different. The things that we see different on the 2011, the failures from say there all the way up to we'll just say 11 and 12s. Some of the issues that we started seeing on the earlier models were cracked cylinder heads on the passenger side. It's not really that prone. It's almost like one of those things where you hear guys talk about the 6.4 cracked blocks when they're putting ARP studs in. Generally, what you see is that head has been taken off, removed, and replaced, and reinstalled, torqued back down, and the casting area in the ones that I see the most of is the number 3 cylinder, and we typically see failure right there, and it'll crack on an intake runner. It's not really, really common, but it does happen. The biggest issue I think that we saw, and it's not just the 11s and 12s, so don't think that. The biggest issue I think that we see out of the anything we'll say 17 or so down, 16 or so down is the valve failures, the exhaust valve failures, and there's a tremendous amount of failures that took out a lot of engines. They put out a TSB, a technical support bulletin, that said basically to check if a certain code within the glow plug module or was indicating an issue in the glow plug and it came in with a low compression issue, to pull the engine, to not further diagnose it. But kind of people started saying, well, it was a glow plug issue that was breaking off and then causing havoc in the cylinders. But actually, in all reality, it wound up being that the exhausts were actually just getting hot and breaking, falling into the cylinder, and then taking the glow plug out. So it's kind of like which came first, the chicken or the egg.
Oh, I got you.
So that's a lot of the failures that we saw out of those. From not strictly speaking now long block. We're not talking about turbos. We're not talking about CP4 failures or things like that. Just speaking as far as the long block is concerned, we saw a lot of failures from not just this. This goes to and the information that I'm giving you is as an engine builder, not a Ford tech. So the great thing that we see is we see the same engines coming in every day, and we also get to see as a machinist, we're looking at it at a different eye. So I can tell you clearances and things like that, and surface finishes and things that normal people wouldn't normally know on stuff like that, because we're looking a lot more analytically, and so we get to see why the failure is, not just what the failure is. One of the main things that I see though in 6.7s, I've got 10 cores here right now, and every core that I've gotten in lately has had the exact same failure, and it's spun bearings. And I talk about this, I've mentioned this to some other folks. Some folks will tell you, no, it doesn't happen to me, I've ran it. I have a theory on it, and it makes perfect sense, at least in my mind. one thing that you have to understand is that Ford was after, and still is, as is all manufacturers, even the big three. Everybody's after fuel economy, and there's things to do to make to get better fuel economy. One of the things is running a lighter weight oil. You have less parasitic drag on the oil pump. The thicker the oil, generally the more RPM, the more horsepower it takes to be able to pump that oil. It's like trying to pump, Hero syrup. I mean, it's if you had ever primed like a Cummins, you take an oil pump, and we always would weld a nut on the front of an oil pump and spin it up, and it primes the whole oil system. If you're trying to do it pretty fast, you notice real quick that whatever drill that you're using loads up really, really fast as soon as you start pumping. It takes a lot of torque to be able to turn. So that being said, the 6.7 running a thinner oil, okay, and it'll tell you in the owner's manual to run anything from, I believe it is a 5 weight or to a 10 weight. Most, I think they're calling severe duty. It's one of the two, but on certain year models, it's one thing. On another year model, it's a little different, but it's a 5 weight, a 10 weight. Guys are running thicker oils and thicker oils and thicker oils. They're running the same stuff they've been running in, their 7.3 or their tractor or whatever, and a 15W40 in a cold situation, cold environment. We see more failures from guys up north with spun bearings than we do from people, down south. But the thing about the rod clearances are on not just the rods but the mains. They're running as close as 7/10 clearance on the rods, which, to put that in kind of some perspective, 7/10 clearance is basically what you would be looking at. The human hair is about 3/1000 of an inch. So you can figure that's close to 1/4 of the human hair. That's how close the clearances are. That's extremely tight. And then when you go and you put a thicker roll, there's one thing that's kind of goofy about the 6.7 is the old routing system is very unique to itself. It has it pipes oil from a long ways away before it ever gets to the first journal. And if you're running a thick oil or a 15W40 oil, something like that, a lot of times what happens in a cold situation, that oil does not move to the areas that it needs to as quickly as it should, and we start seeing spun mains, which is another reason why guys go, well, my crankshaft broke on my 6.7. I don't know what's going on. I don't know why I had failure. Typically what happens is the bearing spins and it blocks off the oil galley or the oil outlet for that area of the crankshaft, and it starves it out. And when it does that, the crank heats up and then breaks. So there's all kind of different things that we've seen and different failures that we've seen on them.
And has the bearing design stayed the same throughout the 11 to current 6.7 Powerstroke, or has Ford changed it?
Yeah, actually the bearings have stayed the same. Now, a lot of guys will say the reason for the failures is because there's no tang on the bearing. Well, that's not the case. The reason why there's no tang on the bearing, I could not tell you. A lot of times what that has to do with either a machining process or anything like that. The tang is just simply to locate the bearing in its bore. It's not there to hold the bearing in place. What holds the bearing in place is crush. So you have a crush factor on that bearing that the bearing is not, it's not round, it's not cylindrical, it's elliptical, and it's bear shape. As you begin to compress that bearing, it actually, if you're looking at it like a football, the points, they actually begin to spread out and expand, and that's what locks that bearing in place. The only time that you use the tang would be, like I say, in the initial installation, which goes to another thing that they did address. So to answer your question, yes, the bearing has stayed the same. Now they did coat one bearing, but that again has stayed the same, but that's different between the predecessor engine like the 6.4, the 6.0, or the 7.3. One thing that they did do different that was a major upgrade, and other bearing manufacturers like Valair or King or ACL or something like that, have looked into doing, and they're working on it currently, is a 3-piece bearing for some of the other Powerstroke engines. That's just like what the 6.7, went to. And the reason why they did that was because when you put that bearing on the cap, or in this in the block in this situation, what happens is a lot of times that bearing will actually spread. The walls of the thrust bearing specifically will spread, and it actually puts a point of kind of a stress point at the radius of where the axial wall would meet the actual bearing itself. And what happens is over the course of time, that can break. So they decided the best thing to do was to go like a Duramax, uses a 3-piece bearing itself, and they kind of like a shim, and they went to that. So that changed, and that's helped a lot.
It's really interesting where I think of a 6.7 Powerstroke owner, whether if somebody's had it for a while and they've read the manual and they've been running a certain type of oil in it the whole time, they're probably not going to come across this failure. But the trucks change hands, or a new enthusiast finds some low mileage truck to buy and gets it, and they may not know what kind of oil the previous owner ran through it, or they might have had a 7.3 and they just jumped from a 2002 to a 2015 or 2017, and we get in those habits of running what's worked and what's done well on other trucks. And it's interesting to hear how something just like that can affect. You got 10 cores there, and there's probably a whole bunch through the year that you see just like that, where
well, and here's something else that kind of backs up my theory. The reason why, I originally said this, but this is something to confirm it. Let me just say, when you buy a new block from Ford, the newer blocks that are coming out aren't running the same clearances. They've opened them up a little bit more. They're actually about a thou clearance from open more. Now, what we do is we use a different clearance altogether, and we use a different bearing altogether. We use a steel back bearing, and it's a tri-material bearing, but it's a greater quality, especially with the backing. It allows for better heat dissipation. Also, it allows for a little bit more crush in the bearing, and we don't see those failures that the factory did. But again, our clearances, we could run a 15W40 clearance and be fine with the engines that we're manufacturing. But again, we don't know if that guy's going to be running this thing in Alaska, if he's going to be running it in Mexico. So there's a lot of variables there that you have to, as an engine builder. And Ford Motor Company does the same thing. But again, they're trying to really, a lot of it comes back down to emissions as well, with the weight oil that they're running. A lot of the sit load and different things like that kind of take place. They have to consider that. And again, we're building it for strictly longevity, and that kind of frees us up from some of the situations that we might not have to deal with that they do.
That's where I think the part of ownership of a diesel has definitely changed. I know these, as far as emissions control trucks, have been around for a while now, but the technology, say, that Ford is put into this engine, and even beyond the long block with the turbo and the injection pump and the injectors and even the transmission and other things that are involved, they're built around this framework, and where something like a podcast like this and being able to talk about what failures are you seeing, why does it happen, how do you avoid it, is really helpful for people that are out there that have these trucks that maybe it hasn't failed yet, or maybe it just did. Maybe they're listening to this podcast and are like, hey, you guys timed this perfect because my 6.7 Powerstroke just spun a bearing, and I want to make sure that I don't have this happen again. And so I think it's part of the education of the diesel truck owner, and you're at the front lines of it. People are calling you guys for engines and have questions and things like that. It's always really fun and interesting, and we learn a lot from chatting with you, about things just like this. And we've gone through like the 6-liter, the 6.4, and now the 6.7, which is the obviously the current crop of Powerstrokes. But I wanted to kind of transition just a little bit, and we had talked last time about some new stuff that you guys were doing with the 6.7 Powerstroke. I want to ask you about that, whether it's for, the daily driver work truck or maybe a little bit more performance, or just kind of what new things you guys have been cranking on with the 6.7.
Yeah, the 6.7, we started our approach to any platform first and foremost is first figure out what's causing the failures, address that, and then secondly, move on to, the performance aspect of it. So the things that we're doing. The first things that we're doing, people a lot of times they'll ask us, I'm looking at a Ford short block or a long block or whatever. I can get one over here and I can get your engine. What's the difference? I mean, really, what's the purpose of going one? At the end of the day, most of the time, people do not realize all they see is an engine's an engine. As long as it starts up when they hit the key, and they don't think too much further down the road than that. And the proof of it is that people are still buying the same parts that failed the first time. And a lot of it may be that they don't understand the risk that they may not have understood the reason why it failed, and because of that, they continue to do the same thing they did before. There's a lot of things that we do different with the 6.7 platform. So, mentioning the things that we talked about with the failures, with the oil clearances, we talked about opening those up. We talked about, I don't think we touched on this, something else that I've seen a lot on the 6.7s, and I'm not trying to go back, but I'm trying to bring, the failures so that you can see the purpose of what we're doing currently and the new stuff that we're bringing to it. We see a lot of the engines come in here and a guy will have 32 bent push rods in the engine. So that's the crank gear spinning on the shaft. It's a pressed gear. It doesn't have any kind of retainer. It's just a press fit, which we welded the crankshaft to fix that issue. The other things that we see with the cylinder head failures are the valves that we're using. We're using a high-performance Inconel valve that handles heat a lot better than does the OE valve, and because of that, we don't have the thankfully, that's the fix for the failures of seeing the head of the valve just fall off and destroy the engine. So these are other things that we've worked on, fixing the basic platform. We've got some other products that we're working on currently, and they're going to be more along the lines of the performance related. A lot of it has to do with the issue with the 6.7 airflow. That's it's a reverse flow engine, and most of the valve angles on previous engines were cut somewhere around 37.5 is what their angle is. They're so restricted, they're really trying to get every CFM they can out of these heads. They're cutting them at 44.5, 45 degrees for the valve face because there's so much restriction there. And because of that, the port does kind of a 180-degree turn. As it goes in, it does a really, really hard turn because the intakes are on the outside, in case anybody doesn't know, and the exhausts are on the inside, which is completely unorthodox to all the other engines that you see running in a diesel pickup today. It's more like an industrial platform like you would see in a large genset engine or something like that. That's pretty normal for them. But anyways, that restriction there is really one of the major, it's one of the major power restrictors that we're going to see with the 6.7 platform. And again, we've talked about this before on porting. You'll have guys go out and they'll spend money on the biggest charge air cooler pipes they can get, and they'll spend money on the biggest, intake they can get, and then they funnel it down to a tiny port that doesn't flow anything. So they're forcing that in, and you get more heat and compression. So those are all things that we've been working on, mainly focusing on the first portion was to address the fixes on the 6.7 themselves with using different parts, aftermarket parts that are available to us, and then now we're kind of turning our turrets towards the cylinder head side of things. So we should have some products coming out there for that.
I had a conversation with someone in the diesel industry recently where we were talking about new trucks versus old trucks, and when you were telling me about some of the OEM failures and the things that you're able to do, it got me thinking about this. Is we were talking about, I think when he first got into diesel, it was like mid-90s, and he had a second-gen 12 valve, and now he's talking about his 2020 like 3,500 Ram. And he's like, the industry and the community as a whole, we look back at these older trucks and we put them on a platform and they almost become iconic. But I've never had a nicer truck to drive, from the Pacific Northwest to the East Coast down to Texas and back home than this 2020. And I said, do you think that as far as the diesel community is concerned, the reason that we've made these older ones more iconic is because we think of, well, are these new ones, will they last as long? And you had mentioned longevity when you were explaining parts of the engine to us. What is your viewpoint and experience with the longevity that you can get out of, say, these newer Powerstrokes? Can they, after you guys work your magic on them, do you see them going, as far or farther than a 7.3 would, or some of the older diesel engines?
Well, that's comparing, again, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. Most folks compare that, and then you go to, well, okay, if we're going to make that 6.7 last as long as the 7.3, do you want 215 horsepower? No, of course not. And everybody said, well, they just didn't make enough power to hurt themselves. Well, it's really true that they were so derated. I mean, they're industrial the applications of these things. It was a freaking bus motor or a dump truck engine that you put in. They've done the modern diesel engine in an automotive application is no longer the same diesel engine whatsoever that you think you wrap your head around. It's not the 12 valve that used to be in a Komatsu Dozer, and it's not the 444E that used to be in the salt truck running up and down the highway. It is a compacted graphite iron block that is made to be much lighter yet still stronger, but it still does not have the demands on it are much greater than what they've ever been, especially with the emissions. And unfortunately, even as we can do some amazing things with these engines, and we can fix these problems that we talked about, the emissions are always going to be, and here's where it happens, okay? This is what kills. After we can fix the spun crank gears, we can fix the spun main bearings and rod bearings, and we can fix the valve failures, and we can fix the cylinder heads cracking, and we can fix the rocker retainers, were the issues there, and the broke crankshafts because of a result of the other things. We can fix all these things. The biggest issue that they're never going to get away from is the soot load and fuel load that's placed in the oil through the emission systems. That's always going to be, the limiting factor there. Can it? I mean, I've seen plenty of 6.7s going now for 500,000 miles. That's very respectable. Out of any engine, if you can get 500,000 miles out of the engine, there's no shame in that. I've seen a tremendous amount of 7.3s go 1 million miles. But again, they did not have to deal with the same, garbage that the modern engine does. Nor, I mean, think about it. The new engines now coming out 475 horsepower and 1,050 pound-feet of torque. You have to do a lot of upgrades to the 7.3 to get it anywhere close to that. Plus, it's not going to run the drivability aspect of it. It's not going to be as good as a variable geometry turbo. It's not the same platform whatsoever. But you can get great mileage. But I think the days of seeing 1 million mile engines, with the emissions that we're having, the over-the-road guys can't get it now. They're going through these engines and doing more in frames now than ever before, and it's becoming a nightmare to them. And again, the old 7.3s were running a different oil than what we're running now because of that. Everything's changed. So, unfortunately, diesel engines can be extremely durable. They're a huge benefit, and there's so many reasons to buy a diesel engine over a gasoline engine. If you're pulling and you're working and you're using your truck because you've got a horse trailer that you need to pull, or you've got, fill in the blank, you need it to work, there's no substitute for an engine that has the torque output that the diesel does. But the days of million-mile engines with the current OE equipment that comes with the engine, I just don't see it happen.
That's really I think it really goes to the I think the main buying reason for a lot of people is the towing and the hauling and the ease that it'll do it and the economy that you can get towing these heavy loads with a diesel truck versus, half-ton gas truck, which, I mean, those are definitely making more power and torque, and they keep upping the ratings on those. But I think that's why people are buying these newer trucks, and it's like nobody wants these days to have 180 horsepower, crank horsepower diesel truck with the rattly door panels and none of the technology, that was around 25 years ago. We want those things. We want the heated and cooled seats. We want that quick spooling turbo charger and all those things. So it's not necessarily new. I think for the last few years, it's kind of been something that the diesel community has been talking about, but that was something I wanted to ask you about the 6.7 Powerstroke is, what kind of mileage or feedback do you get from customers that you already have that have come to you with, a failed stock engine, and you guys are able to build them one to handle whatever use that they're using the truck for, and you're really be able to give them kind of the best of both worlds in a way. They still have the technology that's in their 2017 or 2018 or 2012, but they have something that's more reliable than the OEM version.
Yeah, and we're actually looking at, the new 2020s that just came out, they've lightened up the rotational assembly a little over 2 pounds by use of a steel piston, which is unheard of in the automotive application, but it's not unheard of in the big truck application. So that's something that we're really working with on using some of the newer parts to go into retrofit back into the other engines. So, what's really going to be nice is that you don't have to buy a set of, Ross pistons or a set of, fill in the blank, forged pistons for some of these engines now. The compression heights are a little different. The connecting rods will be different, but all in all, it should be able to be a pretty much direct drop in. But we'll see. But that's some of the stuff that we're going to start working on. So if the guy buys a 2011 engine that had the little rods that would we refer to them as just the dinky rod, which is the 11 to basically 17. They had 3 rods. They had the real there's a 34 and a 35 millimeter pin, but the early models, the shaft of the connecting rod is really weak. So we've been taking the connecting rods that are much more robust in the later year models and retrofitting those, and that's pretty common. But what we're going to start doing, and hopefully we'll have available, is some retrofits for the 2020. So, you're going to be looking at some of the internals there. But it's exciting to see what's around the corner for the platform of the 6.7 because, like I said, the steel piston is, they really took the whole idea. They're increasing cylinder pressures. They're increasing the injection pressures, 36,000 psi, and they've had a lot of failures with even the LMLs. Heaven knows the 6.4s had cracked pistons left and right. So with this increase in pressure, they're after, again, cleaner burning combustion chambers with lower hydrocarbon levels. And in order to do that, we have to have greater atomization. And if that's going to be the case, then we've got to do something about the cast piston. So anyway, it's the 6.7 is going to be I don't foresee it going anywhere. It's already broken the record for the Powerstroke platform as far as the longevity. That's, and it wasn't just Powerstroke that had the years of the emission change. Because, you had the Cummins was the same way. There were so many that you had a different year model from the 02 to the 03 to the 04.5 to the, and it would change so many different times to the 6.7, and then the same thing with the Duramax. But especially with the Duramax, you take something like that and you look at it and you go, yeah, they changed it, but they kept, in this pretty much in the same vein of things. You can kind of see the transformation take place. In the 6, when they went from a 7.3 to the 6.4 or 6.0, it was radically different. When they went from the 6.0 to the 6.4, maybe a little bit of transition there. I can see, it's a high pressure common rail system coming out of a HUE injection system, but the blocks they are first cousins. If there's, they're definitely that way. And then, they jump into the 6.7. Of course, it's a different manufacturer, and it totally changes. But there's been a lot of lot of evolution in the 6.7 engines. They're going to be around for a lot longer, so that means the aftermarket's only going to be stronger with them. Generally, you just really don't want to invest that much R&D in something that's only been around for 3 years. And there's not as many owners there. It's not as big a market. But because of that, I think that the performance end of the 6.7 is probably going to start becoming more of a rival. The biggest restriction now, for sure, is going to be on the top end. The bottom end, they ripped a page out of the Duramax playbook. I mean, they're running, 4 main bolts and 2 cross bolts. They got a sturdy bottom end. We've done some things with, we have billet main caps that we're running to keep, you're asking about the products that we sell and the products that we have when we make billet main caps for the 6.7, so that it kind of eliminates that fretting issue where you have a little bit of walk in the crankshaft as you start applying more power. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with that. But again, like I said, where I really want to direct my attention is towards the top end of that end.
What's really interesting as well is, I think with the 6.7 Powerstroke, is there seems to be a lot of interest in embracing it. And I think part of it is, or probably the main reason, is the run of it, how long it's been. And like you mentioned, it's, a 9-year run and doesn't look like it's going to stop. So there's investment from, that you guys are doing into it. There's investment, obviously, that Ford's, that's their product. They're going to, keep investing in it. And it's really cool to see how you can take, in the future, some of these 2020 updates and be able to put them in a, previous 6.7 engine. But I think from the performance side, it seems like the Powerstroke community is, I don't want to say more willing, but they're more excited to embrace it as a racing platform than, say, some of the other brands where it's like, oh no, you got to go back to this, or you got to create this hybrid engine, or go back to something else. There seems to be a lot of excitement for the future of what the 6.7 can do in the competition area. And I wanted to ask you about that. Is that kind of the sentiment that you get from race teams or shops out there that are, they want to do these competitions, these larger events, these race circuits where they're embracing or wanting to use a 6.7 Powerstroke?
Yeah, generally when, in the diesel world, the way that it works as far as the performance side of things, when you've got a $70,000 pickup truck, you're not looking at necessarily, buying it to make a race truck out of it. You're looking at an old beater platform. But as these trucks start getting older, you start seeing the 6.7 now, the latest engine, you're starting to see more people do things with it as far as the performance side goes. There's still a lot left to do because the 6-liter and the 6.4 have been, they're you can buy those trucks cheap and spend the money to hop them up and to go out and race with them or do whatever you're going to do with them. The 6.7s just now are starting to come down where, you kind of got a price bracket where you're trying to work with, and you don't want to spend all your go fast parts on, the truck itself. But I'm starting to see a few more come out as far as there's some guys out there that are making some decent numbers with them. But they've got, like I said, that I think they're just at the tip of the iceberg as far as the platform goes. There's a lot more left there that hasn't been done with the 6.7. So I think it'll change in the next 2 years. This is going to be a big help with the 2020 coming out with the steel pistons. That's going to, because you don't have to wait for the aftermarket to provide a solution for that. That's going to be a direct drop in. So that's kind of it's easy for us to. One thing that I have learned in this industry is it always takes you longer to get to market with the parts that you thought you were going to make. It always takes longer for the R&D, and it takes longer for the development and the design and the CAD drawings, the machining. If I go to design a part, I may change it 20 times before I actually make before I make the finished product. So it takes a good while for that aftermarket to catch up to those guys, and the 6.7's been out there long enough now that some of those parts are available. But being able to grab something off the shelf that all provided, they have got. I've got access to a lot of the information from the design of the pistons and things like that. and it's pretty cool to see that they're sticking this stuff in an OE. That's what's crazy. You can go buy the truck off a lot, and it's running basically like a monotone piston. So it'll be a huge boost for that platform.
That's what I was thinking, is just with the resources and the time that you have, which I think is probably one of the biggest challenges, is how much time do you have to, capitalize and change and everything, 100 ideas that you have. Well, if a Ford Motor Company has taken this major component and changed it and upgraded it, and it fits into other years, well, now you can put that time and that effort into the airflow or into different things that you want to do. And so I think that's a major leap forward.
Yeah, the big issue for steel pistons, and this is going to be one of the reasons why the aftermarket is going to be super slow to get to that, is that, and it depends on how they go about it, but the piston coolant jet is designed, 6-liter didn't have this, but the 6.4 started it as far as the Powerstroke platform is concerned. And I say that started it, I take that back. They didn't start it, but because it was used before, but the piston coolant jet sprays on the underside of the piston. It's got a galley that is formed, basically a cavity, not a galley, but basically in the top of that piston, so that oil can run through one hole, absorb as much heat as it can before it goes out the other side. Well, there's a process that they use, and I don't know if I can share that or not, but there's a process that they use in order to make that cavity. It's really fascinating, and it's really cool. But that cavity is extremely crucial to the thickness of the cavity is extremely crucial, because if it gets too thin, it can actually it's not very far from the combustion bowl itself. Now, the way that they do the 6.7 piston is it's fusion welded. So they take the top cap of that piston and the top piece of that piston right above the ring limb and the body of the piston, and they friction weld it together. Well, when they friction weld it together, that cavity is already machined in there. So when it's friction welded together, if you go too far in friction welding, you actually block that cavity and cover that hole over, which would be, it'd be useless at that point. There is a specific science in the way that's made. The aftermarket will probably just blow through that and just make a solid piston, but you're not getting the heat dissipation from that. They may not care. I don't know. It just depends on, again, the application of the piston. As far as them making the aftermarket following in the footsteps of OE and being able to produce that, it's not going to happen anytime soon if it ever happens. That's some serious stuff. I mean, that's some really, really difficult things to reproduce. There's some very intelligent minds behind it, but there's also some very expensive equipment that's involved with knowing at what point that temperature, the friction bond occurs and it starts to weld, and then how far to go in to feed it before you start having an issue with the cavity.
It's crazy to think about just the potential that is there with, I mean, you have, like you said, the minds, the expensive equipments, the experience, and now you can get it. It's just like it's there.
Yeah, like it's a shot in the arm. I mean, it's just, nobody else has got it. I mean, the Powerstroke guys have it, but who'd have thought the Powerstroke guys would have it? I mean, don't get me wrong. Don't stone me for saying it, but, who'd have thought that the Powerstroke guys, well, the truth of the matter is Ford, yeah, I can totally see Ford doing it. But as far as the aftermarket is looking at it, you would have thought the Dodge guys would have had it first, But if it were in an aftermarket situation, yeah, the guys that are making the parts for the aftermarket, their platform might be chasing the Cummins world, because let's face it, that's basically the Cummins and the Duramaxes. Generally, they're the ones that get fed first for the aftermarket. The Ford guys are the ones that get stuck with the crumbs. But in this scenario with the OE, we're the king of the heat. We get the best stuff first because nobody else is doing that. That's pretty cool, because that's thanks to Ford and the technology that they've got. It's interesting that roles kind of got, like I said, roles kind of got reversed on that. There's some cool stuff going on with the Cummins guys with the CGI, the block that they've developed at 19 and the roller. Y'all are just now getting around to having polar lifters. but but anyways, it's going to be fun to be able to see where that leads. Because I said, that just reduces the amount of time and of investment that we have to have product there.
Whenever we do an episode with you and chat about engines, there's always a lot of incredible feedback. We see it on YouTube a lot as well, and people commenting and jumping in. I think one we did, it was about 2 years ago. I don't know how many thousands of views it has, and people are still commenting. I was looking today, and I was replying to a guy that had a question 2 years later. And I think it's the way you present the information and talk about it and your passion for it. And I always like, after, we've talked about an engine or a part or something like that, and, someone's listening to their truck right now, they're on lunch or something like that, and like, hey, I got a question, or my engine just went out, I want to talk to you guys. What's the best way for them to reach out to you, talk to you or anyone that's in the office, get some questions answered and kind of plan, either their performance build or their, replacement engine for their work truck and daily driver?
Yeah, absolutely. You can get a hold of us at the shop phone at 901-553-9847. You can get on Facebook, go to Choate Engineering Performance. That's CHOATE. And you can get on. Now that's the engine building side. That's the part development side and things. That's basically all I do anymore. I started out years and years and years ago, turning wrenches on trucks, and it just kind of grew and grew and grew. And so we still have another business that's a sister company to us, which is called Diesel Doctor. So you can get on Diesel Doctor Tennessee if you're interested in the repair side. Like I said, people ship us their trucks all over the country. We had a guy the other day, and I cannot begin to tell you how many horror stories that I have heard. This is completely as a side note. Somebody else we sold both these guys' engines, and they both had stories about, man, they had sent their stuff to, I think you had maybe you made a post or something about, like, what's the absolute worst experience that you've ever had having your truck. Man, you need to get a hold of this guy, because oh my goodness, I cannot believe after having this guy having his truck for 2 years, they had to go chase it down. The law was involved. It's a big scandal. And I thought, wow, that's terrible. And then I found out another guy that bought an engine from us. He just got fed up because he took a truck to this guy, and they had to get the law. Where he took it was up north. They found the truck in Florida, and he had to go down there to the trailer to get it. It was a nightmare. So we have people all over the country. This guy was from Colorado, and he flew in to pick up his truck 2 weeks ago, I think it was. So that's the Diesel Doctor side. So if you buy an engine from us and you want it installed from us, you can give us a call, get that set up. We can have your truck shipped here. We'll build the engine, and then we can install it on the other side. Everything can be done here, and you can tell us from mile to wild whatever kind of build you want. We do all that. Instagram, it's under Choate Engineering Performance on Instagram, and www.choateperformance.com is our website.
I remember when I made that post, and there was a half dozen emails. Like, I don't think the guys wanted to send them on social media because they were so long. And I sat down and I read them, and I'm like, I'm getting all emotional and like distraught, because I'm like thinking of myself in this situation, and I don't have my vehicle for several years, and I don't know where it is. And that's one of the things that I really love talking, doing these podcasts and being able to present this information so that whoever listens, or they see it, they can, listen on their way home from work or when they're doing something on the weekend and try to avoid that mistake, because it can get so bad or just be stressful, so. Oh
yeah, for sure. I'll tell you, people ask me all the time about our business and why I do, why I do what I do. Obviously, we enjoy this industry, but I want something that my kid, my son, can one day, if he decides to go this route, I want him to be able to. I want to leave him a good name. You can't. I may not leave him a dollar, but maybe if I die, heaven forbid, my health takes all the money that you work for. And it seems like that's the way it winds up being a lot of times. There's a friend of mine that used to say, you spend your wealth, or you spend your health to get your wealth, and when you get older, you spend your wealth to get your health. And that's just kind of the way it goes. But one thing I definitely want to leave him is a good name and a good business. And that's the other day we had a customer that had a question. He thought he had a problem on an engine. He thought that it was a short block, and he tried two different sets of heads, or not two different sets, but two different heads. Who would have thought that two heads back to back would have had two separate issues? But I drove 13 hours one way just to make sure the guy was taken care of, and ended up, we put the truck back together just to show him, because it was a short block that he purchased. But I went all that way just to make sure the guy was taken care of, because he's a dealer of ours. He's a great guy, and I'm excited to see businesses like that grow, because the guy's just got he's got a passion for what he does, and he's a hard worker. And anyways, got down there, and we got it figured out. And I stayed down there for a couple of days, just getting him squared away and helping him get everything back together, and just wanting to build those relationships with our dealers. And that's something else. If the shops are listening or something, we do have dealer programs where if you get set up with us, we give dealer discounts and stuff like that. But I do want a good name above all things, and I've said that many times before. But that's something I want to leave. I want to leave my children, and that's, you see so many things like that going on today, and people. It reminds me of that movie that, I think it's Ocean's 11 or 12 or whatever it was. The guy said, I want the last check that I write to bounce. Oh, man, that's selfish, boy. I mean, you don't care about the next generation, do you? But I just thought, that's typical. That's exactly the way a lot of people are. I don't want that. I want people to remember me for something better than the last check I wrote bounce. I'll come back from the grave and tell my wife, you better pay. But anyway.
We appreciate your time today, Cass, as always, and sharing with us some 6.7 Powerstroke information and some things that you guys are working on. And I definitely, throughout this year and next year, being able to chat with you about some of the things you talked about with advancements and the kind of leap ahead that the 6.7 Powerstroke has with some technology and advancements, and jumping into some more engine talk. It's always one of our most popular episodes is talking about engines and the technology that goes into them, and really that's what we're passionate about. We like diesel fuel, but it's going into a diesel engine, and that's where a lot of the enthusiasts just gravitate towards it. So it's always a great time to chat with you.
It was my pleasure. I enjoyed it.
Don't forget, diesel fans, make sure and head on over on Instagram, YouTube, or any of the podcast apps that you subscribe to, and look for the Power Driven Podcast. It's our new one where we talk with people about their stories in business, personally, in motorsports, in any kind of industry, to be able to allow them to tell their story and inspire other people. And also, if there's any questions that you have for Cass, if you have a 6.7 liter Powerstroke or a 6.4, 6.0, need some engine help, make sure and reach out to Choate Engineering, give them a call, send them a message on social media or an email. They're more than happy to help you. Till next time, keep the shiny side up.